Why letting go is the key to freedom. Once, on the outskirts of a quiet village nestled against the edge of a vast and mysterious forest, lived a man who seemed to possess everything anyone could ever dream of. He had wealth, respect, and an enviable life, a life that others would long to have. His home was a magnificent stone mansion, nestled on a hill with a panoramic view of the distant valleys below. Every day, the man was surrounded by luxury. Fine silks draped over his shoulders, servants at his beck and call, and exquisite treasures from every corner of the world filling his grand halls. The world admired him, and to all outward appearances, he had it all. Yet, despite his abundance, every morning when he woke up, something gnawed at him. A deep unease gripped his chest, a quiet tension that settled in his bones like an old friend. It was a strange, hollow feeling that no amount of gold, no number of lavish banquets, and no titles of respect could ever soothe. No matter how many riches he accumulated, something within him remained perpetually restless. What burdened him wasn't his possessions or his outward success, but something far more insidious, something that had silently crept into his life over time. Attachment. He was bound by invisible chains, chains of expectation, of legacy, of control, and of image. It wasn't the weight of the objects that filled his rooms. It was the weight of his identity, the pressure of maintaining that identity, and the fear of losing the image he had so carefully curated. These attachments, these invisible bonds, were tighter than any rope, and each passing year they pulled him further away from the very life he thought he had been building. His days were filled with meetings and decisions, his nights filled with dreams of what might be lost. In the silence of his grand home, surrounded by priceless treasures, the man would often walk alone through the halls, feeling more like a ghost than a king. The portraits of his ancestors, each one more illustrious than the last, stared down at him from their gilded frames. His library, filled with rare books and manuscripts, stood untouched and unopened, a collection that no one would ever read. But no matter how many trinkets and accomplishments surrounded him, there was an emptiness inside him, a space that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. It wasn't the silence that troubled him, nor the loneliness, for the house was never truly empty. Servants and guests filled his home, but their presence only seemed to amplify his own sense of isolation. His life, despite its outward perfection, felt more like a performance than a reality. His identity had become a story he had crafted, a mask he wore every day. But behind that mask, there was no peace, no clarity, and certainly no freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting the sky in brilliant hues of red and purple, the man set out for his usual walk. The forest had always been a place of solace for him, a place where the chaos of his life could momentarily be put on hold. In the midst of the towering trees where the world seemed to pause, he found a brief reprieve from his responsibilities. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and earth filled his lungs, and for a moment, he was free from the weight of his title. But that night, something felt different. As he walked deeper into the woods, he came upon a small clearing where a fire burned brightly, the flames casting shadows that seemed to dance like phantoms across the forest floor. Sitting beside the fire was a woman. She appeared older than him, with a kind of agelessness that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. She seemed neither young nor old, but instead timeless, as though she had seen centuries pass by and was somehow untouched by them. Her clothes were simple, worn by time and use, not the luxurious fabrics that he was accustomed to. There were no jewels adorning her neck, no fine garments draped over her body. She was as different from the life he knew as night was from day, yet there was something in her presence that made him feel uneasy. She sat still, her hands resting gently in her lap, her gaze fixed on the fire, as though she were contemplating something far deeper than the mere flames before her. Intrigued by her tranquility, the man approached her cautiously. "What brings you here?" he asked, his voice tentative, unsure of what to expect. The woman turned her gaze to him slowly. Her eyes were sharp, clear, yet they held a depth that seemed to see straight through him, as though she had known him for lifetimes. "I live here," she said, her voice calm, almost serene, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. He looked at her for a moment, studying her. Her stillness, her simplicity, was so starkly different from the life he had built for himself. There was a peace about her that he couldn't quite grasp. a peace he had never known. "You live here," he repeated, half to himself, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her words. How could she live here, alone, in the heart of the forest, with nothing to her name? How could she live without all the things that defined a person? Without wealth, without status, without the security of a mansion and riches? But it wasn't her simplicity that captivated him. It was the tranquility she exuded. It was as if she held the secret to a life he had never known. It was unsettling, even infuriating, and the more he looked at her, the more restless he became. Unable to contain his curiosity, he asked the question that had been growing in his mind. How is it that you seem so free? Free from worry? Free from regret? A soft smile tugged at the woman's lips. Freedom, she said, her voice soft but carrying an unexpected weight, isn't something you find. It's something you give up. Her words hung in the air, and the man's mind froze. He didn't understand. How could freedom be something you gave up? Everything he had worked for, everything he had fought to build, was about gaining more freedom, more control, more power. His name, his legacy, his wealth, those were the very things that made him who he was. How could giving them up possibly lead to freedom? The woman's smile deepened, almost knowingly. Everything you've worked for, she continued, all that you hold dear has tied you to a life that keeps you bound. Your name, your legacy, your wealth, they are chains, not treasures. Chains that bind you to a version of yourself you no longer need to be. The man shook his head in disbelief. But these things, these are what make me who I am. I cannot simply let go of everything I've built. These things are my identity. She paused, her gaze turning back to the fire, her voice almost lost in the crackle of the flames. You are not your possessions. You are not your legacy. You are not the image you've so carefully constructed. You are the choices you make, the actions you take, and the peace you find within yourself. And the only way to find true peace is to let go. The words resonated, though he didn't understand them fully. Could it be true? Could freedom come from letting go of everything that had defined him? Could he, the man who had spent his life building an empire, truly find peace by releasing his grip on it all? That night, sleep eluded him. He wandered through the forest, his mind swirling with questions. Every step felt heavier, as if the very earth beneath his feet was reminding him of the burdens he carried. What if she was right? What if the very things he held so tightly to, the wealth, the control, the reputation, were the very things keeping him from living a full, free life? What if they were the chains that kept him from finding the peace he so desperately craved? The chains that had bound him unseen for so long. As the first light of dawn began to break through the dense canopy of trees, the man found himself sitting by the stream, his back resting against the cool, moss-covered rocks. The rhythmic sound of the flowing water seemed to soothe his mind, but his thoughts were anything but calm. The weight of the woman's words lingered in his consciousness like a fog that refused to lift. He had always prided himself on his certainty, on the unshakable belief that his success, his wealth, his achievements, his legacy, was the key to his happiness. It was the bedrock of his existence, the foundation on which he had built his entire life. Yet now, as he sat there with the early morning mist swirling around him, everything he had once believed in seemed fragile, uncertain, as if the very ground beneath him were crumbling away. For the first time in his life, he questioned everything. How could the things that had always defined him, his possessions, his titles, the admiration of others, no longer bring him peace? How could they have become chains, as the woman had said, instead of the treasures he had always believed them to be? The more he thought about it, the more the truth began to seep into his bones. He had lived for others, his family, his peers, the society that had worshipped him as a successful man. He had lived for his legacy, for the future he thought he was building. But in doing so, he had forgotten to live for himself. The question that now haunted him was simple. What had he truly wanted? In his relentless pursuit of success, he had never stopped to ask himself what made him feel alive, what made him truly happy. His life had been a series of obligations, not choices, a never-ending cycle of striving for more, accumulating more, but never truly experiencing life as it was meant to be lived. In the process, he had lost sight of what mattered most, the simple joy of being. The decision to let go didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic, instantaneous realization, but rather a slow, gradual unraveling. Over the course of several days, he began to release small things that in the past he would never have imagined parting with. The fine clothes that made him appear important, the ornate portrait collection that depicted his ancestors in all their glory, the vast mansion that had once felt like the epitome of success. All of it, bit by bit, he began to let go. At first, it was terrifying. The thought of losing everything that had defined him for so long, of letting go of the life he had worked so hard to build, sent a chill through his spine. He could feel the weight of his past pulling him back, urging him to hold on. What would he be without these things? Who would he be if he let go of the very identity he had crafted for himself? The fear was suffocating, and for a moment he wondered if he was making a grave mistake. But then, something unexpected happened. As he began to part with these possessions, a strange sense of relief washed over him. The more he released, the lighter he felt. It was as though he was shedding layers of himself, layers of expectations, of image, of the past, that no longer served him. With each thing he let go of, he felt a little freer, a little more like himself. The burden of perfection, the need to live up to others' expectations, slowly faded away. He had expected the world to feel emptier, more hollow without these things, but instead it felt more full, more vibrant, more alive. The sky above him seemed bluer, the trees in the forest greener, the stars that appeared at night more brilliant than ever before. The world didn't lose its beauty when he let go of his possessions. It became more vivid, more intense. He had not become poor, he had become free. Even as he began to feel the weight lifting off his shoulders, there was still one final chain holding him back: his identity. For all the material things he had discarded, he still clung to the idea of who he was supposed to be, the man he thought he had to be. His legacy, his reputation, those were the things he still held on to, afraid to let go of them. The man had come so far in his journey of releasing his attachments, but now he faced the most difficult challenge of all: letting go of his identity. One day, while walking through the village, he saw the woman again. She was sitting by the same fire, the same tranquil presence that had so captivated him before. Her simplicity had not changed. She was as much at peace as ever, while he, despite all his efforts, still felt something missing. This time, when he approached her, he didn't ask a question. Instead, he sat beside her in silence, the weight of his thoughts heavy in his chest. They sat together in the stillness for a long while, the only sound being the crackling of the fire and the distant rustling of the trees. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the woman spoke softly, almost as if she had been waiting for him to reach this point. "You still hold on to the last chain, don't you?" she said. The man felt his heart tighten in his chest. He looked at her, his eyes full of the struggle he had been facing. "I don't know how to let go of who I am," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. The woman smiled gently, as if she had known all along what he would say. "The truth is, you never were who you thought you were," she said, her voice soft but filled with wisdom. "You were never your possessions, your legacy, or your reputation. You are simply a being who exists in this moment. And the moment you let go of the past, you will discover who you truly are." It was then, as the fire flickered and the wind whispered through the trees, that he understood. His identity had never been defined by the things he owned or the accomplishments he had racked up over the years. He had always been so wrapped up in the idea of who he was supposed to be that he had never stopped to consider who he actually was. Letting go wasn't about giving up everything he had. It was about shedding the burden of expectations and embracing the fullness of life, unencumbered by the past. For the first time in his life, the man felt free. He stood up slowly, looking out over the vast expanse of the forest, his heart beating with a newfound clarity. He was no longer weighed down by the past. He was no longer bound by the image of himself that he had carried for so long. He had rediscovered himself in the process of letting go, and in doing so, he had found the peace he had been searching for. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, the woman spoke once more. "The path to freedom is not an easy one, but it is the only path worth taking." With those words, the man walked away from the fire, no longer burdened by the weight of his past, but embracing the limitless possibilities of the future. So what about you? Can you let go of the things that hold you back? Would you be willing to give up the very things you think define you just to discover what true freedom feels like? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on what you'd let go of to feel truly free. And if you know someone who's struggling with letting go, share this story with them. It might be the key to their freedom. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we think about life, freedom, and success.